Hi.
Very good. It's so nice to have you here. So I want to do a little introduction, and just in case, well, people who watch the video may not know who you are. So um, you run a group called the Climate Water Project, which we'll probably talk about a little bit later, and you're co-founder for the Regenerative Water Alliance. So I'd like to know more about that too. And you're a writer and a podcaster.
Wait, what did you
Uh,
study?
I studied living systems
Okay.
at Saybrook University. So Bella Banathy was one of my instructors, and there's a long story there, but he was one of the bigger names in systems 50 years ago. So this is quite a while ago before he died. So
Okay.
that
So,
was
and your interest in this
yes.
system. Okay.
Oh,
Right.
I've had a systems view for yeah, and I spent I don't know a decade or more walking the hills with Fritjof Capra. And he used to hold public lectures while he was writing his book. That's how he wrote his books, was to talk
Th-
about it
Was
basically.
this
And
in
so
Berkeley?
yep, this was in Berkeley. So I have lots of tapes of those talks. I used to walk my dog and listen to them over and over again.
Okay, cool. I used
So
to help out a guy at Saybrook University. I forget his name. He was the head of the American Psychological University, a really big name. I forget anyway.
yeah, yeah. No, that was when I was in Berkeley.
Uh-huh. Cool.
Yeah. So good. So I want to ask you, because you're one of the few people that I know. I mean, you have such a whole systems view, and that brings new things to the table when we talk about water. So you're one of the few people that I know that really have an understanding of how biodiversity impacts water. And I would like you to talk about that a little bit, because I don't think it's something that most people are really aware of.
Yeah, so there's a food web where we know that like certain animals eat other animals, eat plants, and the nutrients cycle around, and then when they die, it goes back into the soil. And um, but it's also very tied up with the whole water cycle because animals and plants need water, and then the plants evapotranspire that water back up into the air, and then that combines with the water coming in from the oceans to create rain. So so how the whole biodiversity, the whole food chain, different animals, they affect the plants that are growing, and so that then affects the rain. So there's this whole feedback loop that's happening. So that's why, I mean, just as one example, if you think of salmon swimming upstream, they get eaten by bears, and the bears then poop out the nutrients, and that forms actually a significant amount of the nutrients of, say, redwood forests. And those redwood forests then evapotranspire and create rain that then kind of helps more plants grow, and also helps the bears survive better because they have more food. So there's this whole different loops happening.
Have you worked with the Daisy World at all?
Yeah. So the Daisy world is an example of a very simplified model that developed by James Lovelock, who came up with Gaia. And the idea was that there were black and white daisies. That's all there were on this planet. And so when it's hotter, then the white daisies actually survive more, and so they cool down the planet. And when there's colder, the black daisies survive more, and they heat up the planet. So that's a simple example of a biodiversity of two things that helps the planet. But then they actually introduced um, rabbits into the picture too, and the rabbits actually, you might think they might disturb the whole daisy thing, but actually they can be helpful too, because they actually create a bit of disturbance in the daisy field that then allows it to readjust to the temperature. And then they brought in an animal that ate the rabbits, and that also helped kind of help. It had an influence on how it reached homeostasis or reached certain stable states. And the importance of an apex predator that eats the herbivores like rabbits is that rabbits can go to overpopulate and then eat all the vegetation. So you actually need an apex predator on top to make sure that doesn't happen. So yeah, they did these kind of biodiversity simulations in Daisy where they introduced different levels of trophic levels.
What I found so fascinating about that is that it actually allowed the plants to fine tune more closely so that they could actually be more nuanced in their management of the temperature and the rain
Yeah,
with
yeah. So I
with
think
that disturbance. I think
that's
that
yeah, sometimes that can happen. That's the case. Yeah. So it's kind of complex, but yeah, that's one effect that can happen.
yeah, and I think that's just really amazing. It really pointed out to me how important everything is, you
Mhm.
know, and the value in an interesting way of the eating that we are so squeamish about. You know, we really have this resistance to things eating each other and the death cycle and all of that. And yet, how important that is, because that's one of the regulating mechanisms, actually.
Yeah, it's kind of like, in our bodies, like molecules are constantly being made and then unmade, and kind of this cycle that's happening, and that actually generates energy. And in a similar way that when animals are eating other animals, they're actually taking those molecules, sometimes building on it and changing them and then pooping them out. And then so it's kind of creating this cycle of molecules that are making and unmaking each other. And it actually also generates energy. And so it's actually a useful thing, yeah, eating. It's kind of a funny thing. I mean, at one point I was like, wow, actually one of the biggest things in the whole evolution is eating. And yet we don't normally frame it that way, but it's such an important part of evolution. And we sometimes view it just from the point of the predator killing that prey, but if you view eating as kind of this bigger, larger cycle where it's cycling the molecules and nutrients, then it kind of gives you a slightly different perspective of evolution.
It's also the mechanism by which most indigenous people managed their landscape because they managed it for their needs, which
Yeah,
includes food.
right. Yeah.
So,
Yeah, so there was a guy, Howard Odum, and I think also Lotka. Like they kind of viewed the cycle of nutrients as the primary object in evolution, as opposed to the individual. I mean, like they still view the individual as important as one of the primary objects, but also viewing that cycle, the animals and plants that are involved in that cycle of nutrients as one of the primary objects. And if you do that, then you see that how then you kind of get a different view of evolution, because then the animals are actually also contributing to the plants because they're pooping out
yes,
stuff that increases the soil. And so animals are doing a lot of stuff to help the plants. It's not just the plants are evolving to not get eaten by animals and animals evolving to eat more plants. No, they're actually, involved in a cycle. Same with prey and predator and prey. It's not just, the lion is eating the rabbit and the rabbit's trying to avoid the lion. No, they're actually in this cycle of nutrients where the lion then poops out stuff that produces the plants that helps the rabbits survive. And so the lions can also aid in the growth of the rabbits, not just destruction. And so that's what Lotka and Odum came up. When they're actually two of the biggest ecologists in the whole 20th century. So Lotka came up with the Lotka-Volterra equation, which is the predator-prey equation. So yeah, but the idea somehow didn't get that particular idea didn't get as maximized into the whole ecology.
what's squeamish? It's squeamish. It's really weird to think that it's like okay to be eaten. I think people have an inherent kind of resistance to that. Um, I'm wondering in our conversation, there are two words, symbiosis and ecologies. And I'm not sure if I'm remembering this right. Syntony also is another word for how cells intermingle, how they co-evolve in a certain kind of way. And I'm wondering if you could clarify these for me, because obviously I'm not clear. about how these all come together. I've been very taken with ecologies and the recognition that seems to be seated in that word of the relationships that are inherent in ecologies, and that's sort of what's missing from most of what we do. We are actors on things, but we don't see that reciprocal piece, that relationship piece that really holds it together. We kind of dismiss that. And these words for me help to bring that forward, but they're all a little bit different. So could you clarify that for me?
Yeah, I don't know if I know the definition of syntony, but for symbiosis, it is a big part of evolution. And Lynn Margulis pioneered this. She actually helped with the Gaia theory too. And
Yeah.
she did the symbiosis theory before Gaia. And it revolutionized biology a bit and evolution because it's saying that everything's not just competitive. There's actually a lot of synergies between plants and animals and animals and animals and plants and foods. And like they can be helping each other too. And so it creates a different framework of evolution. And it's not just the environment is affecting animals and plants and organisms. It's that plants, animals, and organisms affecting the environment too. And that includes the climate. So, oxygen in the atmosphere is provided by animals. So they had evolved to breathe out the oxygen. Same with carbon and nitrogen. Like these gases were not there before organisms evolved. And it's not just that the climate acts and selects on organisms. It's actually organisms actually are also creating the climate. So it's a feedback loop.
Yeah. That's another reason why all life is so important, because it all contributes in ways that we don't yet understand, but are vital to make everything live. So how does that all roll into your sort of, I don't know if discovery is the right word, but your thesis on the fourth principle of thermodynamics, which tickles me a great deal. So could you, because it sounds to me like it's really an outgrowth of a lot of this. Am I correct?
So the fourth law of thermodynamics, well, there's been different propositions for the fourth law, but one of them is being the idea of maximum entropy production or maximum power production, has different formulations. And so usually a system will move more and more to more entropy states. So if you have a hot tea, it'll cool down so that the temperature is the same, and that actually increases the entropy of the whole system. So the question arises: why, if on Earth we have more and more entropy, we get more and more order, like animals and organisms are more ordered, which is a lower entropy state. And the idea is that we're pushing out that entropy out into the rest of outer space. And so if you increase the entropy flowing out of the Earth, then you can actually have Earth be in a more ordered state. And so the way entropy comes into the Earth is through photons, through sunlight. And that sunlight comes in from one direction from the sun. But if you actually have the sunlight then shoot out, when you reflect it back out, radiate it back out into space in all directions, then the entropy of it has increased because it's now in many directions. And also, if you turn it into long wave radiation, it also becomes higher more entropy gets radiated into space. So if you have soil absorbing that sunlight and water in the soil absorbing it, that helps to then create more entropy radiated into space, which then allows the Earth itself to have less entropy and be more ordered, and so then function in a more ordered way.
Talk about order and the importance of order.
Well, in thermodynamics, order is kind of low entropy state. And so
Because it takes
otherwise,
energy
like an
to stay in
animal
order.
organism would just fall apart. Like there's no reason it kind of creates these cells and these bones and these blood flowing. So that's a kind of highly ordered system. And if it comes disordered, like when you die, then it all kind of just decomposes.
Right. So it takes energy to keep shape, basically.
Um, Yeah, that's part of it. Yeah, so so it's using energy to kind of create that order.
to maintain itself. That's so interesting. So where my mind is going with that is we don't really know what life is as such, or where it comes from, or any of that, or how it materializes on the planet. That's sort of a mystery. But it's certainly needs to have shape, because that's how we recognize it, is when it's embodied in something, is in some sort of organism of some kind. And so in a way we maybe can we think of life as the ability to create order out of chaos in a way, because it creates that shape, it allows that shape to exist. And then from that shape come all the things that we recognize as life, all of the agencies and all the different choices that everything is made to make life happen on the planet. I mean, it just sounds, I get this exuberant playfulness that just sort of bubbles out of everything of, oh my God, look what I can do. And that engagement that we have with each other of, tapping you on the shoulder and saying, look at this. This neat. And the discovery of, wow, if you can do that, then I can do this. That just opens up this in my mind, that there's something new. I mean, that's just such a joyful, bubbly way of looking at life. And it's so interesting that that is generative, that that is energy making, truly, of its own kind. That there's something about that that is very generative. Yeah, I don't know
Yeah.
how else.
Life kind of begets more life, and life kind of creates the conditions for life.
Yeah, yeah, that's the
And
prime directive.
so, when plants first came onto the continents, in some ways, they also then create more rain. They generate that water cycle. They bring more rain onto the continents, which then allows for more things to use the water and grow. And then as you have more and more different organisms, actually then there's more of an adjacent possible where even more things can actually birth out of that diversity.
Yeah, I love your saying that when plants came onto the land, that they generated more rain so that more life could come. That's if we could just hold that in our minds, it would be so directive, I think, in this particular time. Um, One of the things that kind of consumes a lot of my thought is, what can we do that's being effective in this time? And I know we're so focused on stopping stuff, stopping the warming and stopping all of that. And we're not being very successful at that, because there's this feedback. If we stop our energy use, then we really change our lifestyles personally. And there's kind of a resistance to that. We want to keep our lifestyle, even though we want everybody else to stop whatever it is that's making us warmer. But there's this is a different way of looking at it, of how to keep life, to shift to shift the focus and to be more life evocative, however we could do it. And that seems to me like things that we can actually do. We can be more engaging with life in a way that's mutually enhancing. Can I say that? Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, with economic activity also has a lot of diversity. And so that breeds more diversity, right? So you have more
Right.
internet,
We
more tools that then makes you more stuff. And so that has created this feedback loop that we actually don't, people are a little bit confused about how to get out of, because even as there's all this awareness of global warming, the engine's still running faster and faster to destroy more and more, because we still want to get around, and that we need to get around because we have our livelihoods, and that's like all this activity kind of bursts more activity. So even as we try to stop it, we haven't been very successful at stopping. In fact, it's getting worse. And so the solution, I think, is actually to shift at what aspects of the world we're trying to have more diversity, breeding more diversity, because so we want to actually focus on more living stuff that breeds more and more. So instead of the GDP focusing on certain things, maybe more technological stuff that breeds more technology that then uses more energy and more carbon, like focusing on stuff on stuff that breeds more stuff. Like if you create more of a forest in your local area, that will breed more birds and worms and different types of plants. And so make that the focus of richness, and how we define our economic growth is the richness of life. And so kind of like we have to kind of shift our focuses on what kind of exponentially gets richer and richer. And so yeah, and in that, if you kind of say we're shifting the focus, maybe you don't have to be always focused on stopping. I mean, that's still necessary, but like it kind of gets a little bit frustrating. So like let's say we're trying to grow the whole living system and grow more and more of that and make that the focus. And then that's kind of exciting thing that we're trying to do.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's vibrant and it's rich and it's pleasant to be around.
Right.
I find it kind of ironic that one of the goals of the technical world is to make robots that create themselves. That there's this kind of maybe innate thing in humans to want to make life, but we've got it kind of wrong. We think the making life is a technological thing instead of a relationship thing with life that's already here. Because I think we're key to that. I'm hearing people start talking about humans as keystone species. And in my model, I say humans are intrinsic because we're really a necessary piece. We're not an adjunct. We're not a throw off. We're not something that's just sitting out here that has no relationship. We're integral in some kind of way, but we've lost that sense of how we're integral. And by really being that keystone species, being the one that really facilitates more life. I mean, what we do with plants, hemp is really a great example. The whole pot thing over the past, I don't know, 10 years or so, we've gone from a very simple plant to a whole bunch of very complex plants that do a variety of different things based on what the need is for that particular strain. And that plant has been incredibly responsive to our relationship with it. As we say more of this and less of that, the plant says, sure, here you go. So there's a part of that that would be, that's just really interesting to explore and exciting to explore. And that may feel more us when we get to it. Robots don't feel like us. They really feel separate from us, and they're kind of scary because then people are talking about how they could do things to us. But you don't feel that same way with plants.
Yeah, we can nurture that diversity of plants.
Yeah,
And
yeah, yeah, yeah. And what we've done with dogs. I mean, we have hundreds of different breeds of dogs. They didn't exist. They came because we wanted them, you
right.
know? Yeah, we had a relationship with a species and said, "Oh, don't do this. We want you to do that." And it said, "Fine." And so we've got thousands of different kinds of dogs with different shapes and different colors and different sizes. They look very different, and yet they're all the same species, you know? And we did that because that's what we wanted in some kind of way. If we could grow our houses, wouldn't that be interesting? In the same
Yeah.
kind of way.
Yeah. Yeah, there's some little efforts. There are some people trying to grow houses, like you grow the tree and then the tree is part of your wall somehow.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. We haven't really thought about it deeply enough, but I think there are ways of doing of just being more involved with life and playing with life in a way that's life enhancing instead of not life
Right.
enhancing.
Yeah, even
Yeah.
on your own property, if you have a backyard and housing. I mean, like, there's ways to kind of play around with. So instead of constructing more stuff with your house, maybe it's more deconstructing a room and putting soil in it, and so that the plants are growing and making it half indoors, half outdoors, or kind of like making your whole plot of land you have that as figuring out how you integrate more into it.
Yeah.
And so you could think of development in a different way. So it's not developing the kind of like with more construction materials, but more developing in terms of the richness of biodiversity on your land and figuring out your relationship and how you interact with that whole ecosystem on your piece of land.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that would be fun. I think that would be fun. So tell me about the work that you're doing with the Climate Water Project and the Regenerative Water Alliance.
Yeah, so basically trying to educate and kind of bring to light a lot of the ways the water cycle is part of our ecosystems and climate, raising awareness of that. And um, yeah, and so the Regenerative Water Alliance, we've brought a lot of people together to network and educate, and it's a little bit on hiatus right now. And I focused a little bit more on the research and newsletter and podcast side, where trying to reach a lot of people that way and kind of focusing. So it requires a bit of research to kind of figure out. So, for instance, I read over 100 papers on, the small water cycle and precipitation recycling that the climate scientists did, and then kind of explain to the crowd that there was more the eco people that didn't know all the work that the climate scientists were doing around precipitation recycling. Precipitation recycling being the idea that plants evapotranspire and then
The
creating
biotic
comes back down. No, that's something different. But
okay. Clarify.
recycling is a small water cycle. Yeah. So the small water cycle is where water goes up from the plants and then comes back down as rain.
Okay.
And so there'd been a lot of work on that, but a lot of the eco people didn't know about this. And so anyway, I wrote 2 articles on that, and that's an example of some of the articles I write, trying to kind of bring awareness to some of the stuff that academia is doing, and then also it's putting together different hypotheses and trying to put together the pieces.
You've frozen.
The floods and different things like that.
So you're trying to put together different pieces. You've frozen. So I'm trying to.
Oh, can you hear me now?
Yes. Yeah.
Oh, trying to put together different pieces of the puzzle together. So, there's a lot of people, locals and people doing permaculture that say certain things, and then there's different pieces of the scientific puzzle. So trying to put all these pieces together to understand what's going on.
Yeah, your graphics really help that. You're very good at diagramming and showing visually how that all works. And I think that really helps people very much. Yeah. There's a picture was worth 1,000 words. I think that's really true. If you do it right.
Yeah.
So I want to stick a little bit with the Water Alliance. I realize you're not doing a lot of work there right now, but there's something about that that really speaks to me. I've been involved with the Regenerative Cascadia group, which is working on the Cascadia watershed. And I have a project here in my city of Spokane, which I'm hoping to get people to understand how they can contribute to filling the aquifer, which we sit on. So that's, for me, that's part of what we're looking at in water is how it's connected to different things that we haven't really understood before, and how easy it would be if we work with the water we get instead of getting rid of the water we get and then trying to take it from somewhere else, which is the current model. And the story of Tucson, it really speaks to me where I guess Burt Lancaster just realized that Tucson got enough rain for their use, but they are spending $80 billion bringing water from the Colorado River because they don't keep the water they have. And so they need to get it from somewhere when they need it. And it isn't there when they need it. But if they concentrated on keeping it, they might not need so much. And so I'm kind of using that same sort of idea here. So how does the Water Alliance help people think about those things, or was that part of that design when you figured it out, or is it different?
Yeah, we were definitely discussing issues like that. So yeah, so in Arizona, yeah, like that area, Tucson, they used to have a whole river, I think,
Yes.
flowed through that area. And so through mismanagement and damming and other stuff, they destroyed that water. And so yeah, so we really, it costs a lot of money. And same in New York City, they used to spend so much money cleaning the water, and then they realized they could just restore the whole mountain river system. And so they found that was a lot cheaper way. And so it's taking a lot of money, billions and billions. And I mean, here, but when in the aquifers, that's having an impact on the fires because the trees actually need to bring up a lot of that water during the drought season. This group at UC Berkeley, the Hydro Watch, found that
Yeah.
depending more on what we realize. So when we drain them, we actually are drying out the environment during the dry season, which means that they're possibly more susceptible to wildfires. There's not as much academic research being done on this, but I think that that's like one of the things that you can try and put together the pieces of. And so if in Spokane they are draining aquifers, it may lead to more wildfires in the future. And we're seeing that in California that there's a lot of wildfires, but now it's moving upwards to Oregon and also to Washington. And because Oregon and Washington get a lot of rain, but the key is to kind of keep that rain in the system into the dry seasons so that it
Right.
helps lower the wildfires. Also lower the heat waves because when plants evapotranspire, cools the earth. So and also, if the richer soil have, the more the water actually stays longer in
Right.
the landscape too.
Yeah, you can't have water without rich soil. Yeah, in fact, I heard, and I haven't seen any validation of this, but it was an interesting thought. We had a heat dome here a couple of years ago where we had about a month of 100 degrees or over. And that's pretty unusual for this area. And I was reading just recently that they think that the logging on the west side of the state was really responsible for a lot of that because the evaporation diminished sufficiently
Right.
that it allowed that heat to stay.
Yeah. Yeah. And then droughts and heat waves can move from place to place too. So because precipitation recycling is where, or small water cycle is where the water goes from the land up into the air and then comes back down again. But if nearer the coast or the west coast, there's less evapotranspiration because there's less plants we've developed over the land, then further inland there's going to be less rain too and less cooling. And so it kind of propagates. And so say Francina Dominguez and others researchers found that it takes about 3 months to propagate the rain and the drought and the heat waves, from say the west coast to the Midwest. So there's a lot of interlinked issues, and it's really key. So as part of regenerate cascade, like the bioregion, it's like when you restore the soils and the vegetation in your area, and also maybe if you can lessen the development, depave and whatever, so that
Right.
there's more soil and ecosystem that can absorb the rain, then it has an impact on your water cycle in your area, but also has an impact further down the line.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, 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 yeah. So I'm wondering, we have several people who've been very quiet. If they have questions, I think this would be a good time to open it up if people have things that they would like to ask. Hey, Mark.
Good morning. Yeah, happy to. The question I have is around what is often stated assertion that we don't sort of know why and how life came about, and I guess I have a different take on that. But I guess I'm mostly interested in your perspective on that, Alpha. Like, what would you say about that? And yeah, what ideas and thoughts or work might you point to that could potentially suggest that we do know more about that than maybe sometimes it gets stated? So the sort of the why and the how of life.
Well, I mean, I don't really know how life came about. But there are theories in nonlinear thermodynamics about how systems can absorb sunlight and actually tune to that frequency and then learn to then dissipate that energy. So they kind of start doing work by absorbing that sunlight. Or it could be energy from, say, geothermal vents. And then so that by absorbing and then dissipating energy, you then can lower your entropy of your system that's doing that, and so build more order. And then if it self-replicates, then you're also able to absorb in more and dissipate more, and so self-replication can then start happening. And yeah.
Yeah, there's always a mystery, isn't there? No matter how far down you dig, there's always a mystery, something that goes just not quite. Yeah. Daniel.
Yeah. Hello, Alpha. I think we got connected in LinkedIn a few weeks ago. Andrew Crosby mentioned that we should get in contact. I've been working with this the past 18 years. The main project I'm working with is called Climate Design. And it's mostly about understanding that we need to have contiguous landscapes producing small water cycles in order to modulate the biotic pumps in continents. So the small water cycle is completely in the core of this whole thing, but it does not solve the problem of global atmospheric circulation. And my understanding of this, and that's not really a question, it's like more if you agree on this interpretation, is like when we manage to restore a few tens of thousands of hectares in a watershed inland, and then we get the next watershed restored as well. If you agree that the sequence and contiguity of these small water cycles, they work in waves, pushing in or pulling the moisture from the oceans. The question is if you agree with these interpretations, like waving strings pulling the moisture from the oceans inland.
And when you're saying solve the problem of global atmospheric circulation, you mean that issue of how? What exactly do you mean by that?
I don't think I used the word solve. I think I used the word modulate.
Okay.
Yeah. So
William Ripple, he did some work with small water cycles and precipitation recycling. He says that as ecosystems develop and the continents get populated with organisms, that the small water cycle actually starts growing. There's more and more small water cycles in different places, and so they're able to generate more of their own water. So their own water cycles before all the water comes in from the ocean and then rain. So that's what happens in deserts and where they flash floods, because nothing's holding it. But as you kind of have more vegetation, you actually have local small water cycles that are actually they're providing more of your what it's similar to like a global economic system. So if you're getting all your goods from the global economic system, or you're getting a decent amount from your local economy. And so he's saying that as the system evolves, it should be having more and more, you're getting your goods from your local economy. And so you're getting more and more water from your small water cycle. And then there's the question of how does it propagate inland from inwards. And I'm not totally sure, but if the water is blowing inland and then you have desert instead of vegetation, then I would think that when it falls, like it can't evapotranspire back up because it would just rush out and maybe flow back out to the ocean more. And so I would think that if you have more and more vegetation all the way in, it actually creates more precipitation recycling, creates more rain inland, and so then brings more rain inland.
So you, in principle, you would agree with the idea that the ripples would reciprocate instead of diminish?
Yeah, I have to think about it more because I think it's kind of a complex question, but I do think that if you do have vegetation all the way inland, then it should keep up that precipitation recycling more.
Yeah, in that case, territorial scale means something different when we are talking about atmospheric circulation and when you're talking about community approach. Because in planetary scale, we can't change the atmospheric rhythm and direction and the gradients of pressure with a community orchard or garden. We need contiguity in ecological restoration. Therefore, territorial scale means something different when we are talking about a community and a continent. Because we can't ripple much if we don't have contiguity between one community and another community hundreds of kilometers away. So as much as we can think about economic networks that works very well in the internet, the climate doesn't work the same way the internet works. We need continuous imbalance between high pressure and low pressure to keep the air moving, carrying the moisture, and keep the difference between hot air and cold air enough to make wind and to make condensation and to change the albedos and to produce rain clouds. So if we don't have this contiguity between forced masses, it breaks up and we don't have the ripples of small water cycles. So that's what's behind the climate design project, that we need to understand the places where it makes more sense, because we're not going to cover the entire world with forests, because it would produce the opposite effect that we want. So that's, sorry, I took too much time.
Yeah, it's a very complex question how all the high and low pressure systems and you generate different circulation patterns. But yeah, it's important to create a whole network of these places. And then maybe there's certain places that are more key. So I think continental divides is one place where it's more key to vegetate, because at least Milan and some others were saying, that climate science was saying that the rain blows from the ocean across the continent and goes back out to the ocean, right? So in Spain, it goes from the ocean into the Mediterranean Sea. And so if you don't bring that down, then that water is not, it goes back out to the other ocean or sea. But if you bring it down to the land, then it can actually precipitation, it can moisture hop from one place to another place. So there's key places to look at. And I mean, and doing work in one bioregion does help because it propagates to other areas, because you create more rain downstream of where you are, downwind of where you are. And it's also key that you need to build enough of a network of these places, because There are people saying, I think some of the climate science saying that vegetation can actually affect the jet stream and the Hadley cell and El Nino, but you need enough of this precipitation recycling in order to affect those larger scale atmospheric circulations. Yeah.
Part of what I'm hearing too is that we're kind of leaving the planet out of this again. We're figuring we can do things to it instead of being more in relationship to do something and see what happens, and kind of listen to it and then see what's needed next instead of deciding what's needed next. That there's maybe I mean, I do believe the planet's alive. I do believe that it responds also. I think it's one of the reasons why it's been so tolerant for this long period of time. It's been trying to absorb and rearrange itself to deal with the things that we've been in relationship with it on, which has been a lot of carbon emissions and that kind of stuff. So if we change that, then the planet gets to change too. And so if we diminish the pushes in those areas and create pushes in others, it's going to do different things, and we don't really know what that is. So I feel it's like there's this relationship thing that needs to be built, even on that global scale, and now we can, because we have sensors and stuff that allow us to see things in different places that we didn't have before. We can be more sensitive to what's happening, but we need to be more responsive and not so directive, maybe.
Right. Yeah. We want to be listening to the
Yeah.
planet.
Yeah. So we get to do what we do and then see what happens and then change what we do. It's that dance.
What is the climate design project trying to do exactly?
David?
Firstly, sharing questions about how we examine the things that we believe we know about climate, but actually we didn't ask the questions deep enough and wide enough. So basically sharing questions about how we consider the things that we think we already understand, like gradients of pressure inland. Normally we tend to understand that entropy regulates all of this, but then we have anomalies that we can't explain only with entropy. So we need to make some gymnastics to figure other things, and then suddenly we discover that aerosols are messing up with entropy in 2005. And then other things keeps coming. So the first thing about climate design is about sharing epistemological questions that are before theoretical questions. Because epistemology is about trying to understand if the criteria we use to make knowledge can be used for that knowledge or not. And if you cannot, so we shouldn't use that method, or that question doesn't make any sense to produce any kind of answer. So it's mostly in the first step about sharing questions. And then if we get to consider that the questions are well understood, then we get to consider answers. Like, what types of aerosols are more relevant to produce the difference between water vapor and water condensation? What types of aerosols are more relevant to this in global scale, depending on the regions of the planet? Like, the types of aerosols that we have in Western Sahara are completely different of those that we have in Eastern Sahara. And that's why we have different climate patterns in those different places. And when we try to understand the winds and the wind patterns, considering the mountains, considering the Mediterranean Ocean, the Sahel, then the aerosols would play even a more important role. But not 20 years ago, they didn't even exist in climate sciences as something relevant. So the type of science that we were making before changed completely because something else became considerable. So how many of these things are not being considered today that we don't know, because we don't even guess that we don't know what we think we do?
Yeah.
So mostly about this. And it's not only about atmospheric physics. It includes physics, of course, but it goes far beyond. It goes to culture, it goes to economy, it goes to all the different problems, sociological problems, political problems between borders of countries, between regions of countries. Like, how do we plan ecological restoration in the Mediterranean basin? That's the work I've been completely focused the past 5 years. How we put together a network to restore the mountain forests in the Mediterranean basin. We're talking about more than 100 languages with 3 different families, family languages. We are talking about cultures that's been established more than 10,000 years ago. So we can't just say science is saying this, because people want, like, obey scientists, because we need to build community partnership. And it's even something more than just because we live under the same roof or umbrella or atmosphere. There's something else that we share. So climate design is also about this building up awareness that we share more things that we tend to consider. And in this, academy has everything to learn, because especially in Western universities, they believe they know everything. And they don't want to listen to anybody who didn't publish like 100 articles. And it's nonsense, because they don't build anything together. If they did, what's the result that we have today in global scale? Well, the result we have today is 2023. That's not a very good year to celebrate in climate. That's the result of the Western science. It's quite well proven. So climate design is not about producing technology alone. Is mostly about trying to figure ways to do it together with the people who are living in the places and with people who are not living in the places but would like to share something.
Okay, cool.
I'm always excited to see the amount of thinking so many people have done on where we are and how we can be somewhere else in a better place, not just different, but actually an improved spot. And I think the more we talk together, the richer that conversation is going to become. Because to Daniel's point, we all have different perspectives. We see different things. We resonate with different things. And that brings different things into the conversation than we would have before. That's the whole joy of living, isn't it? Actually, in a big nutshell, that's kind of how we got here in the first place, because every little thing just did that, brought its own thing, and somebody else took off with that idea and did something else. So we're just increasing that, but being more conscious about it than we have been in the past, maybe. Yeah, I so appreciate what you've brought, Alpha, and you, Daniel, also, and Mark. We all just have great things to contribute, and it's just a pleasure to be able to foster those conversations. So I really appreciate it, and I'm very glad that you took the time to be with us, Alpha. Very much so.
Cool.
It's been very great. So come back. Yeah. We
Okay.
don't have to make this a one-off. We can keep it an ongoing conversation in different ways.
Okay.
It would be wonderful. So I know you have to go, as do I. So I'm gonna just thank everybody for being here. And really, are there any more questions before we go? You've got a few minutes, so there's still a spot if somebody has an urgent thing they'd like to share. One of the things I've lost in this version of Zoom for some reason is I can't see people who don't have their cameras on. So they absolutely don't exist. I don't see any way to know that they're here. So I only see you if you have your camera on, but that doesn't mean you're not here. So I'm giving you an opportunity to step up if you'd like to. We'd love to hear from you. Okay. Well, thank you very much for being here and for taking the time. I know it's a little dicey in your schedule, so I really appreciate that. So thank you, Alpha, very much.
Thank you.
Yes. And everybody else, thank you so much for being here. Yes. Bye-bye.